Welcome everyone to this session that forms part of Renew's newly expanded Sustainable House Day program. My name is Anna Cumming and I will be your MC for tonight for a discussion that covers energy efficient systems and appliances for your home. It's the final session in our Sustainable Design 101 series, in which we're getting back to basics to help equip more people with the knowledge and confidence to build or renovate sustainably. If you missed our first 3 sessions, the recordings will be available shortly on our YouTube channel. We have people tuned in from all over the country tonight from a wide variety of different traditional lands. I'm speaking from the traditional country of the Dja Dja Wurrung people in central Victoria, and I acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land and pay my respects to elders past, present, and emerging. So I'm the editor of Sanctuary Modern Green Homes magazine, published by Renew, the organiser of Sustainable House Day. I have a long-standing interest in sustainable, energy-efficient and comfortable homes that tread lightly on the earth, and I so love being part of the mission to inspire and educate people about the design strategies, materials and, tonight, systems available to achieve them. In Sanctuary, we do our best to cover all bases, providing deep dives into topics related to sustainable design, without assuming too much knowledge on the part of our readers. In this session, though, and in fact in the whole series, we'll be sticking with the fundamentals, exploring the basic considerations for rooftop solar and battery storage, as well as heat pump hot water systems, efficient heating and cooling options, induction cooktops and LED lighting. I'm joined tonight by 3 panellists with deep knowledge and experience in energy efficiency and energy systems. Firstly, we have Dean Lombard, who until recently was a senior energy analyst at Renew. He has 20 years experience in policy analysis and advocacy in national and state energy markets, with an emphasis on making the energy system work better for residential consumers, while also reducing its environmental impact. Dean is currently working at Melbourne University, identifying regulatory barriers to community energy projects and continuing in energy consumer advocacy as a consultant. Hi, Dean. Next up is Sarah Feese, team leader of the Sustainable Homes team at Sustainability Victoria. Sarah is an architect by trade and a certified passive house designer. She recently returned to SV after completing a PhD through Swinburne University, which investigated the potential for sustainability transitions through social practice theory research. Sarah currently leads SV's 7-Star Homes program, which works with residential builders to increase industry capacity and capability for delivering energy efficient homes, such an important project. And finally, we're joined by Richard Keech, an engineer, consultant and author with a particular interest in renewable energy and energy efficiency. He was a lead author of the Zero Carbon Australia Buildings Plan and is a regular contributor to Renew's publications on topics related to energy efficiency. He's also the author of the book, The Energy Freedom Home, published by Scribe, and he and his wife, Kate, recently moved into their new all-electric passive house at the Cape Eco Village, southeast of Melbourne, which is featured in Sanctuary issue 56. Hi, Richard. Okay, that's our team for tonight. Let's get started. During our discussion, I'll be putting viewers' questions to our panel. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions during the registration process. You can also put your questions into Zoom's Q&A window at the bottom of the screen as we go. Just a heads up though, there are a lot of you tuned in tonight and we're expecting a high volume of questions. We'll get to as many of them as we possibly can, but our apologies in advance if we don't quite manage to answer yours. You can also use the chat window to make general comments or to contact our behind the scenes team with any problems. Sustainable House Day is generously sponsored by Natters, Design for Place, Your Home, the Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, Sonnen and Lighthouse Architecture and Science, and we thank them all for their support. Also, just to let you know that this session is being recorded tonight. Right, that's the housekeeping out of the way. Let's get stuck into it. How do energy efficient systems and appliances contribute to a sustainable home? Why is it important that we're talking about this tonight? Who'd like to start me off?
I can kick off.
Go for it, Dean.
The thing I often think about, people sometimes think energy efficiency means using less energy. Not necessarily. It means getting better value out of the energy that you use, whether that means getting the same benefit but using less energy, or getting more benefit but using the same amount of energy. So I think that that's a critical way that energy efficiency really contributes to sustainability, just by making the most of the energy, and whether that energy comes from coal power stations or your solar panels or something in between, it's a benefit.
So yeah, getting more out of your energy use, whether that be getting more out of what you use, or using less, or both.
Yeah.
I would add that in thinking about energy efficiency, it's good to understand what your goals are. That I think a good goal for people to have if they're embarking on this journey is to try and make their houses net energy positive. So that basically means using less energy than you generate over the course of a year. So in general, that's going to mean consuming less, or incrementally less as you get better, and generating more. So thinking of energy efficiency at home with your systems as that journey to reaching that point of crossing over, such that you're generating more, and your consumption curve is going down, and that point where they cross, then you're net energy positive.
And to add to that, I think that now we're coming into a time where, with the National Construction Code 2022 being announced, they talk about a whole of home approach. So it's not just understanding what a 7-star rating is for a new home, but it's starting to understand what the whole of energy use is in the home. And one of the biggest things we can do as energy users in the home is understand where our energy is being used, and which appliances in which order are actually sucking the most energy, and how much money that's costing us. So that awareness of your heating and cooling systems as your first one, your hot water systems, and then going down your other list of appliances after that, for people to know and understand how the energy is being used in their home, then allows us to actually manage the way we use the energy. And then we'll talk about solar a lot tonight, I'm sure, but to me, solar is really the last piece of the puzzle. Once you've actually done everything you can to your existing building envelope, and then your appliances in the home to make them as efficient as possible.
Yeah, and it's a really good point about the whole cost part of it, because, while energy efficiency is great for lots of reasons, it's also a really important tool for lower income households to actually say, avoid the high cost of energy usage, or the conversely, to get better outcomes from the energy they can use. One thing that organizations that work with low income households often find is that sometimes increasing efficiency doesn't mean people spend less, but means that they get to use their heater when they used to not be able to. And there are some really important parts for this for people on limited incomes.
I'd also add that so many people perhaps look at energy efficiency through an economic lens, and may think that it's all about just saving money by using less energy. But there's so much more to it. That, for example, using or having a more efficient home with thermal envelope upgrades, it does achieve the goal of using less energy, but at the same time, it's making you more comfortable. So efficiency and improved comfort and resilience usually go hand in hand.
Absolutely. I think one of the top reasons for me is that energy efficiency and energy efficient systems, well-designed systems, contribute to a home being comfortable to live in, which is a really important aspect of sustainability. Just generally speaking, a home that's comfortable to live in will be more loved, and will last for longer, and that has knock-on effects for all sorts of areas of sustainability. So it's not, as you say, Richard, it's not just about reducing bills, although it does seem timely to be talking about this right now, as energy bills, both electricity and gas bills, are going up and cost of living pressures are increasing.
Absolutely. And the different efficiencies in the different systems too, which I'm sure we can answer questions about later as well. What is the most efficient heating system to use, for example? That they're the things that can really impact your bill as well.
Yeah, so I like the point that you made there about understanding your energy use as a first step to reducing it, or to finding efficiencies, either through the systems that you have installed or through the building envelope, even how you drive the house.
That's right. Yeah, often we see the energy bill and we just see one number. And often we kind of see that total amount of energy that we've used, gas or electricity, and then we quickly pay that bill and we forget about it because we don't want to think about it. And usually we get a bit of a shock when we see it. So yeah, I'm really a big advocate for promoting that education about how our energy is actually being used in the home.
What are quick things that people could do at home, quick and easy things that people could do at home to get a better handle on what appliances are using what energy?
Yeah, understanding the order. So the biggest consumer of energy in your home is your heating and cooling system, followed by your hot water system, typically for 90% of homes across Australia. And then after that, it'll be moving on to the other appliances in your home, such as your cooking systems and your lighting, and if you've got a pool spa or a spa pump, that can also use a lot of energy in the home. So understanding that addressing your heating and cooling system and making that as efficient as possible is going to be the number one thing you can do in your home to make it more efficient before you're whacking on solar panels. That's a good first step. And then, as Richard's already mentioned, the concept of using your home itself as a battery. So if you can improve the thermal performance of your home, and by thermal performance, we mean making sure your walls and your ceiling and your floors and your windows are all performing to the best possibility that they can, would be the next step to go. And even, at Sustainability Victoria, we suggest to people the simplicity of having curtains on your windows can provide huge benefit if you have single glazing in both summer and winter. So it's possible even to go to your secondhand store sometimes and get some curtains and also pelmets. I'm always saying to people, bring back the pelmets. I'd love to see them come back as a trend. Maybe Renew and Sanctuary can do that.
Just installed one in my living room, my new living room last week.
Lovely.
At the end of winter, but better than nothing. So here's a bit of a leading question. Why is getting off gas one of the first things people should be considering in this space? And what's the best way to go about it? Dean, I know this is, it's right up everybody's alley, but particularly you, Dean, maybe?
I'm happy to go first. I was sort of waiting for Richard, but I'm totally happy to go first. I think there's a couple of main reasons why moving away from gas is an important consideration. One is the environmental impact, sustainability aspect of it. Gas is a fossil fuel. It's always a fossil fuel. It's not going to become less of a fossil fuel. Electricity is, at the moment, still a lot of electricity is fossil fuel, but that's getting less, and it continues to get less. And if you are able to get your own solar panels, it gets less and less. So electricity actually gives you the opportunity to stop emitting carbon from your energy usage, and gas.
So when you say getting less and less, Dean, you mean that more and more grid electricity is being
generated
that's right.
by
renewable means and not by burning coal.
At the moment, it's about 30% in the national energy market. About 30% of our electricity on an annual basis is generated by renewable energy with no emissions. That's a huge increase on just 10 or 15 years ago, and it's just going to get more. So I think that's one reason, one big reason. And I think one of the other ones is really just about the cost. You've got two energy connections to your house. You've got two fixed charges that you're paying. Your bill always has like a service charge that might be $1 a day plus a usage charge. If you actually don't have that second energy connection, that's already like a $300 to $400 a year saving, not even counting the usage saving because you're not paying that fixed charge. So I think they're two of the big reasons for gas, but there's lots of others. I'm sure that the other panelists will talk about some
health reasons as well. Gas emissions in your house.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest, sorry, Richard. One of the biggest ones for me is that the technology has just improved so much in the last, 5 years even. And from my role in the Victorian government, the rhetoric we used to use was gas is, the way to go. That's great. Get your gas instantaneous hot water system. And now the heat pump technology has just surpassed it so much that the efficiency is so much better. And also the possibility to have, as Richard mentioned before, the net zero energy home. That's all possible now if we can move to more electric appliances in the home.
And the cost of those newer appliances on the market, like hot water heat pumps, is coming down all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. As to the question of why to get off gas, I build on what Dean was saying about the carbon emissions. I think what's gravely underestimated is how bad gas is as a fuel when it comes to emissions. The gas emissions are worse than most people think. There's like I've been in this space long enough to remember when everyone was talking about gas as an emission fuel, as a bridge fuel, as being better than coal. But as time has gone on, we've realised that there's two elements to this. One, as to why gas is worse than people think. One is that the global warming potential of gas, it's a factor used to scale the emission intensity of gas relative to CO2. The factor that's generally used in carbon accounting is a 100-year global warming potential. But we don't have 100 years to solve the climate crisis. In emission science, there's a 20-year global warming potential in 100-year, and the 100-year global warming potential of methane is about 30, but over 20 years it's about 83. So in other words, it's about three and a half times worse when you look at it in a time horizon that makes sense for realistic action on climate. And the other factor is that the release of methane into the atmosphere before it gets burnt is considerable, and by many accounts underestimated. And so my personal view is that it's probably underestimated by at least 3 times. And so you take those two factors together and they multiply, then you're looking at an emissions blowout by basically a factor of 10. So in other words, gas is worse from an emissions point of view by about a factor of 10 compared to what industry would have you believe.
So we really need to be getting off gas. It's not about what we'd like.
Yeah.
So what is the? I mean, it seems pretty. It's pretty obvious how to avoid getting on gas if you're building a new house. But what's the best way to go about it if you're living in a house with gas appliances already? Richard, I know you've done this in your previous house in Melbourne. Is that right? Got yourself off gas. What's the best way to tackle it?
Well, mate, would it be appropriate for me to share a slide? Would that work?
Sure.
Hang on. No, not working.
Not working. Okay. Not to worry.
Anyway, so long story short, it took me 7 years in my old house in Essendon, and when I started, gas was about 3/4 of my total energy, and over the course of years 2007 to 2012, I went through the usual things of dry proofing, insulation glazing, lighting upgrades, replace my heating and cooling system, and through that process managed to reduce my underlying home consumption by about 75%. And at the end of 2010, I think it was, we finally disconnected from gas. The following year, the electricity use went up a bit, but overall the profile, the trajectory was still downwards. So
what was the hardest gas appliance to get rid of, or to find a good replacement for? Keeping in mind that we're talking about 10 to 12 years ago, so things will be different now.
Overall, it was actually much easier than I thought, but everyone's journey is going to be different. So probably the hardest things in that whole retrofit journey were not related to getting rid of gas. They were about the more difficult parts of improving the thermal envelope, like insulating the walls and the floor. But as it turned out, getting rid of gas was the easy part.
Okay, cool. Dean, what advice do you give people when they are looking to get off gas and don't know where to start?
Yeah, look, it depends a bit on where the people are coming from, what their resources are, and how fast they want to move. Because you can basically rip out all your gas appliances, put in new electrical appliances, and you've done it. That's a big upfront cost. You'll actually get payback eventually, but it also means you're throwing out appliances that are probably still useful, and it takes a while to start getting the payback. So what we often would recommend to people is when you've got an appliance that needs to be replaced anyway, that's a perfect time to change it for gas, because you're going to have to spend the money anyway to replace it. Even if the electric appliance costs a bit more than the gas appliance would. And has often been the case, and it's becoming a bit less so as the electric appliances are becoming more common, but it's still a bit the case for like hot water. I think a lot of the heat pump hot water systems are a bit more expensive than the gas equivalents, but less so than they used to be. But like if you replace it anyway, that's a small extra cost that you're going to pay, and you'll get your payback quicker. The one that pays back most, and at Renew's done heaps of analysis of the cost effectiveness of doing this, and the one that is an absolute no-brainer cost-wise is heating. If you throw out a perfectly good like ducted gas hot water system, ducted gas heating system, and replace it with a couple of well-placed reverse cycle air conditioners, you come out ahead financially in a few years, because the saving is that much in areas that have lots of heating. This is different for say Queensland and a lot of WA where you don't do much heating, but in areas that you do have a lot of heating, it's a total no-brainer. And the others, the cooking and the hot water, the sort of overall cost ends up being fairly similar. But when you stack it together with all electric and no gas, you make that extra saving of not having the
supply charge
connection. So it's really a holistic way to look at it is good. And we often see people, doing one at a time, sort of in two stages. Maybe like the first appliance that goes, switch out to electric. When the next one's getting ready to go, then do the other two, because if you've only got one gas appliance, it's always cost effective straight away to switch it for electric because of that saving of the connection charge.
that's a really good
and
point.
that's the general advice, but there's a few situations where you might do it differently, but for most situations, most people, that's generally the best way to do it. And then you can decide what you're going to do with your gas meter, your gas line. Some people just get it end their contract and they've still got a meter there that they're not using, and they don't have a gas account. Others will get the meter removed, which might cost a bit of money because the gas company has to come out and remove it. Some people like to get the entire pipe to the street removed. That costs a bit more, but if that's what you want to do, then it's sort of worth it, I guess, in the end.
Yeah, and speaking from personal experience, when I took my house off gas a couple of years ago, I actually had to get the abolishment done through my retailer and take it back to the from the meter back to the street and get the the gas company to do that. Otherwise, I would have still been paying the supply charge, the daily supply. So I think from what
even if you had no account.
Yes, yeah. So that's what we hear at that story. A lot of people that get all the way and take all the appliances out and then still have that supply charge, because that can be the trickiest bit sometimes. And sometimes there's even fees to pay. That wasn't my experience, but I have heard that can be the case.
It seems to vary quite a lot around.
It varies a lot. Just different gas companies, but also different states have different rules. We tried to sort of map the differences at Renew a few years ago, and I think we just gave up. It was so complicated. And it can depend as much on who you happen to speak to at the call center as anything else. There's not really a consistent framework for it. I think that's one change in regulation that will be really good is a consistent approach to gas abolishment. And cost recovery is fine. It does cost money for the company to send someone out and do it, but some of the gas companies might charge $80 or $150, which feels a bit more like maybe that's a cost. The ones that charge $1,500, it's like, no, you're just profit.
Can't possibly cost that much.
So some regulatory certainty on that would be good.
Yeah. Can I, since we're talking abolishment, I'll come back to what Sarah said, that can mean either just removing the meter, or it might mean removing the meter and removing the service line back to the street. And when people are requesting to get off gas, there's two decision points. One is, do you do you keep a gas connection to your house or not? In theory, it should be enough just to stop being a customer of the gas company and leave the meter there. In practice, it turns out that's much harder than it might seem. That so long as you have a meter there, they really want to bill you, whether or not you're using it, and whether or not you have a commercial relationship with them. That they will very often deem a charge to have been incurred. And so that's the first lesson. You probably want to get the meter removed, even if you don't have a relationship with the gas company, just because it'll make things so much easier in the long term.
So possibly slightly discouraging for the next person who owns your house as well to, get back on gas.
Yes, and you know, in terms of the stats, every house that's got a meter is still recorded as on the books of the gas industry. And then, so let's say you make that decision that you're going to disconnect. So the terminology you need to use when dealing with the gas company is abolishment, service abolishment. It's not enough to say I want to disconnect, or I want to stop my gas service. That's not enough. You need to seek abolishment specifically in that, and more than that, when you're having that discussion with them, they might assume that it means. In my case, it was a little different to Sarah's, and it might vary from distributor to distributor. But I realised that they were going to charge a lot more to remove the line back to the street, and they didn't insist on that being the case. So it was sufficient for me to just have the meter removed and leave that service line capped.
Okay, we might drag ourselves out of this particular rabbit hole. Thanks, everyone. So let's talk about, seeing as we're already touching on it, let's talk about energy efficient heating and cooling and hot water. What are the options for what are the best options that you guys recommend for heating and cooling and for hot water? Why are they the most energy efficient? Dean, do you want to kick us off?
Sure. And it can be different in different circumstances, but on average, like for typical households, I would generally go heat pump heating, which is a reverse cycle air conditioner, is absolutely the most efficient for heating. If you're in an area that uses lots of heating, some areas don't use much heating, so they don't need to think about it.
What do you mean by a heat pump for heating and cooling?
Yeah, so a heat pump for heating and cooling is a reverse cycle air conditioner. Okay. Most air conditioners heat and cool.
Split system, or one of those ones that sits on the blows air, right?
Generally, split systems are the simplest. Some people don't like them because they're a bit intrusive. You can get ones that are sort of a bit more concealed. You can get what they call multi-head units, where there's fewer outdoor units controlling a larger number of indoor units.
Yeah, just making sure everyone knows what we're talking about, because sometimes
you also get
talking about them as heat pumps doesn't really compute with people.
Yeah.
Although
you
they
also
are
get ducted heat pump systems, which some people like to have. They are less efficient because you lose energy in the ducts.
Yep. And so what is it about that technology that's more energy efficient than other forms of heating and cooling?
Yeah, the heat pump is the most efficient technology for heating, absolutely. Which is why it's also used in hot water systems, and heat pump hot water systems are very efficient. In some areas of Australia, solar hot water is actually very efficient and probably more cost effective and use less sort of grid energy than heat pump. Parts of WA, parts of Queensland, but in the more southern states, you'll find a heat pump uses less energy and has less emissions, because you need to boost a solar hot water system in cooler areas a lot more of the time.
Perhaps I can come back to Anna's point about why heat pumps are better, and that's because, in a very real sense, we're harvesting renewable heat energy out of the ambient air. So this is not a metaphor. It's actually happening. You're able to take heat energy out of air, even though it might be cold outside. So this seems like black magic to some people, but it's real. The physics work, and
my understanding is that the thing about heat pump technology is that the energy put in to create the heating air, say, to warm up the air, is 3 or 4 times less than the heat produced, and that's to do with the technology of pressurizing the air.
Yeah.
So
the amount of heat that you can move relative to the amount of energy you need to move it.
To do it.
Yeah, that's called the coefficient of performance. And so by definition, something like a gas system is always going to be less than 1. Your typical radiant panel electric heater is going to be exactly 1. But
1 kilowatt in, 1 kilowatt out.
Yeah, a kilowatt of electricity gives a kilowatt of heat. But a heat pump can be many multiples. So, 3, 4, 5 times as much heat energy compared to the amount of energy in the electricity needed to drive the system. So
I've got a question here on reverse cycle air conditioners, which are heat pumps, from Lorian. Reverse cycle air conditioners more efficient and a better option than hydronic wall panels powered by a heat pump?
I would say yes, generally. The hydronic system heats water that gets pumped around through the radiators or through, coils under the floor. A lot of people in cold areas really like hydronic because it's a radiant sort of heat. There's no fan blowing stuff. Most hydronic systems at the moment are run by gas. There was a question earlier about that too. So it's actually a very expensive form of heating, but it's very pleasant. A lot of people like it. It's so subjective what sort of heat you like. Most people I know many people who have switched from hydronic to reverse cycle air conditioners and just found they were just perfectly happy with reverse cycle air conditioners. They work great. They were much cheaper to run. They were simpler. To briefly pick up on the earlier question on hydronics, you usually can't switch a gas hydronic system over to heat pump because the heat pump heats to a lower temperature, so it needs bigger pipes for the water. It's all a bit technical, but you'll often need to upgrade the pipes or the panels. It depends. You'd really need to get a specialist to assess it, but we've
not as easy as just replacing one with the other.
Just replace it. So yeah, reverse cycle heating is absolutely more efficient than hydronic. A hydronic heat pump system is still more efficient than a gas one and cheaper to run. A bit more expensive to buy just because they're not as common.
And there's also the option of in-slab hydronic heating too, which is the same technology, just through pipes in the slab rather than through radiators.
That's right. And
quite common as well.
It is good to point out that it depends on the climate where you live. A lot of people do find that the in-slab systems, they take a while to heat up and then a while to sort of unheat when you don't need heating anymore. So people with hydronic in-slab systems or even resistive electric slab heating, which is common in a lot of regional areas, often find they have to open windows on cold days to let some of the heat out because it's too hot and you can't actually turn down the floor. So that is a consideration.
Or not quick enough anyway.
If you were living in sub-zero sort of climate, that might be awesome, but in most parts of Australia, probably not necessary.
And another part of Lorian's question was, if for people who choose hydronic heating, what do they do for cooling? And that's a really good question because, plenty of people might end up putting reverse cycle air conditioners on the wall anyway to handle hot weather in summer, in which case then you're doubling up on the heating potential.
Absolutely. Otherwise, you'd be looking at a passive strategy of having some natural ventilation through your windows through the, from the south to the north side, preferably depending on where your wind's coming from, and also ceiling fans, which are a relatively, low cost, low energy use item to run in your home.
Some hydronic systems can reverse cycle and can refrigerate water and run that through the panels. Apparently it helps a bit, but it's not the same as having an air conditioner blowing cool air into the room because the coldness just doesn't radiate the same way that hot air will radiate from a hot one. So
they can also get condensation on the panels or on the floor. We had a site visit to the South Melbourne Library, which have a ground source heat pump and in slab heating and cooling, and they apparently had a disaster once where the in slab hydronic cooling was too cool and it caused basically raining indoors over the books
Wow.
Gosh.
Yeah, can I come back to the point about hydronic versus blown air systems? An objection I get really often is about the underlying comfort of blown air versus radiant systems. A lot of people are inclined to think that blown air systems aren't able to give the same level of comfort. There's obviously an element of truth to that you know, you don't want to be sitting in front of a hot blast, but
Very much personal preference, I think.
Yeah, there's more to it than meets the eye. A lot of people's negative experiences with heating from split systems comes from the systems that aren't well sized to the space, and spaces that are poorly insulated. So, in other words, the systems have to work much harder than they should, and that the discomfort that people experience is largely not intrinsic to the heating system, but it's a problem with the space that they're having to work much harder than they need to. And so conversely, another way of looking at that is the experience of people that have a well-insulated house with good draft proofing, that they are able to achieve levels of comfort with split systems, blown air systems, that are at least as good as with hydronic, because the systems aren't having to work too hard.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think everyone would agree just from their own experience. I think that if you're in a well-sealed space that is a few degrees cooler, you are more and comfortable. You'll be more comfortable at a few degrees cooler than in a drafty, windy space with moving air moving around you that is warmer, where the ambient air temperature is warmer.
And that really echoes experience of some people I've spoken to who building a new house or doing a big reno, installed hydronic heating and also upped the thermal performance like insulation and draft stopping. And they basically found that with all that insulation, you simply just don't need the powerful heat that you get from a hydronic system.
Yeah.
And they found that they could barely use the system because they would just overheat.
Yeah. Ironically, people like hydronic because it feels a very gentle heat, but from physics point of view, hydronics are actually a brute force approach. They're not a subtle approach, because they just have to throw so much heat into the space, and then it wafts up from the radiant panels, and then it eventually gets to you. But the amount of heat you need to get that gentle feel is actually
that's a good point,
much larger.
There's a lot of people in the chat asking about mechanical ventilation with heat recovery, which is MVHR, otherwise known as heat recovery ventilation, confusingly, HRV. Same thing, different acronym. These are systems that they're basically ventilation systems rather than heating and cooling systems, but they, as the name suggests, they do include heat recovery. Sarah, are you able to tell us a little bit about, just give us a quick overview of what that technology actually does?
Absolutely. Yeah, so they're a really important part of any passive house design, of course. And what it does is, if you are bringing in from the supply in the warm air, for example, then it's exchanging that when it's crossing over, and it's using that to heat the incoming air. And so those little efficiencies that you're getting through that kind of system, and the opposite if it's taking in cool air and you want to bring cool air into the home, and that just improves the total efficiency of the system, but also I think creates a lovely, comfortable ambient temperature. And with the National Construction Code 2022 coming in, one of the requirements is actually, as homes become more tighter and better well sealed, as we've discussed, under 5 air changes per hour. Now, to understand, an average home out on the street in Australia would be about 15 air changes per hour. Maybe a new home from a volume builder is about 10 air changes per hour. If you get your house brand new to 5 air changes per hour, noting that a passive house is 0.6 air changes per hour. If you're going below that 5, then it's going to come in as the regulation that you'll need one of these systems to help ventilate the home.
Yep. and they don't exactly provide heating, but they do recover the heat that is in the air, the exhaust air that's going out of your home. So
that's right. Yeah, and
maintain the heat in your home, I guess, or the cool in summer.
In the chat as well, I can see there's a lot of health benefits too from that type of technology, which everyone's a lot more conscious of now after the last.
And those systems can, as Alan just wrote in the chat as well, those systems can include a small heat pump as part of them. And generally, homes, my understanding at least, is that homes require a smaller system if they're incorporated in a heat recovery ventilation system than they may otherwise. Moving on from that though, because that is getting quite technical, I do have there's a clarification question that's come in that perhaps we should address. Somebody says they're still a little confused about the difference between heat pumps and reverse cycle air conditioning.
Okay, I'm going to take that. Basically, there's sort of the same thing in terms of this. A heat pump is a particular device that, as Rich was explaining before, takes ambient heat from the air in order to heat the home, or it can do reverse to cool it. So a fridge is a heat pump. A reverse cycle air conditioner is a heat pump. Even a not reverse cycle air conditioner, like an old-fashioned only cooling air conditioner, generally is a heat pump of a kind.
One of those boxes in a window thing.
The technical name of the technology. The reverse cycle air conditioner is what we call the system. In a lot of other countries, they don't even call them reverse cycle air conditioners. They call them heat pumps. In Europe, they call them heat pumps because they use them much more for heating than for cooling. We call them air conditioners because we're generally a hotter climate and we've used air conditioners of other types as well. So, yeah. Yeah,
if you go down to Tassie, they're used to calling these things heat pumps because they didn't have gas. Until 10 years ago.
I think a lot of people have them on their walls and use them for cooling in summer and possibly aren't even aware that they could also effectively use them for heating in winter.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm sure all the intelligent people on this call tonight already know about something that we call it as the Goldilocks zone. So we talk about in wintertime setting your heating between 18 to 21 degrees, and in summertime you're cooling between around 24 to 26 degrees. But, often when I tell people that, they don't realise that there's actually these sweet spots that you should be setting in it for different times of year.
And heat pumps also do hot water.
Yes, I actually.
Same technology. Let's talk about hot water, because this is one area where heat pumps are a relatively new thing in the market, and becoming cheaper and becoming more available and generally pretty great. Let's talk about that, Sarah.
I wanted to jump in here because Dean mentioned before that heat pump technology is what's in your fridge. Someone said to me recently, a heat pump hot water system is doing the reverse to what your fridge does. And that clicked for me, even someone who has a technical mind. So that's an easy way to understand it. And the technology has just improved so much in the last couple of years. And we're also seeing a lot of rebates. So check out your local, probably state government agencies for any rebates that might be available for heat pump hot water systems.
Yeah, worth mentioning that the renewable energy target scheme that subsidises rooftop solar also subsidises heat pump hot water systems and solar hot water systems. So that's a federally administrated system, and it does make a considerable difference in the net cost for a heat pump hot water system.
Absolutely, and not all heat pumps are actually created equal too. So I just want everyone to understand that there are different levels of the market in heat pump systems. And we get a lot of comments from people that we speak to about the decibel level of their heat pumps. And I think there's been a few comments in the chat about that already. Some of the higher end models have a lower decibel, meaning that you can't hear them as loudly when they're running. And some of the ones that are lower to mid end of the range have higher decibels. So that can be a bit difficult if it's next to a bedroom or something that you actually don't want to hear it running.
Yeah, good point, Sarah. I'd recommend people, if they haven't experienced one before, to seek out an opportunity to see it in action before you buy it. If possible. That won't always be possible. But as a rule of thumb, manufacturers have a rated output generally less than 50 decibels, but units that are up close to 50 might be a bit noisy if they're running overnight next to, say, a bedroom or your neighbour. So watch out for that. But there is the opportunity, especially for houses with solar, to run systems on a timer so that they do their boost. They do that heat pump action during the day when noise is not so much of a concern,
and when there's more solar being generated,
and when there's more solar. So you're effectively using the system as a battery to store solar energy into your hot water tank.
And that's actually good for the system as a whole, the energy system as a whole, because a lot of solar gets generated in the middle of the day that needs to be used.
So it's a way to offset. It's basically a way to offset your solar generation and use it via hot water. Caroline would like to know, actually, while we're on the top of this particular topic, Caroline would like to know whether a heat pump for hot water requires solar panels.
We get this question a lot at SV, actually, because there's a bit of confusion. I think because we've had systems in the past out there like gas instantaneous heating with solar hot water attached to it. There's a bit of confusion that people think that those two systems kind of go together, but it's more the case, like Richard was just talking about, using your solar PV system to run your heat pump efficiently.
I think one thing
Go
on, Richard.
If I can make a suggestion, that if people are shopping for a heat pump hot water service, one feature that they should look for is that it has a timer. Not all of them do, and that being able to set it to run during the day is useful. But because the ones that don't just will operate thermostatically and might come on at any time of the day or night, depending upon the temperature.
Good to have control over when it heats, and I mean that relates not just to solar generation, but also to whether, if you've got an off-peak tariff overnight, for example, you might choose to run it then, especially for people who don't have access to solar. Pam would like to know, are heat pumps worth it? Cutting right to the chase. Do they run out of hot water?
I think the question about do they run out of hot water is a good one, because a lot of people ask that, and maybe some people have experienced it. The thing is, a heat pump hot water system is a storage hot water system. There are basically two types of hot water systems: storage and instantaneous. Storage is when you've got a big tank of water, you heat it up, the tank's insulated, the water stays hot for a day, and you use it hot. If the tank's big enough, it'll stay hot. If you had even those old school in the roof, gravity fed electric hot water tanks, if you ran out of hot water, it's because your tank wasn't big enough. That's the thing. And sometimes people try to save money by buying a smaller storage hot water system. It's not a good idea, because you run out of hot water and nobody likes that. The advice we would give at Renew for that was, if you're actually installing a hot water system, don't install it to how much you think you'll use. Install it to the size of the house, because, a 3-bedroom house, even if there's only one of you living there right now, it's going to may well have 4 people living there in 4 years' time, 5 years' time. It's generally wise to scale into the house. Most hot water systems let you turn down, like storage ones, a lot of them let you turn down the capacity if you want to use less. And as long as you make sure you got the right size, you're not going to run out. They are definitely worth it, running cost wise. If you buy the most expensive heat pump hot water system, it might not really be worth it financially over its lifetime if it's really super expensive, but it might give great service and that might be worth it. But a good mid-priced heat pump will be cost effective over its lifetime compared to the alternatives. But I think the good thing to remember with hot water, and I was going to say this before, so I'll say it now, hot water is actually one of the more nuanced sort of appliance choices. There's really different options for different people, and while on average I'd go, yeah, look, a heat pump storage hot water system is a great option. There's all these exceptions, like I already mentioned before. If you're in like North Queensland or WA, solar hot water is great, because for like 10 months of the year you don't have to put any other energy into it, and for the other 2 months, it's worth it.
It's a bit of boosting for just a short time.
That's right. For some people who've got heaps of solar, those old-fashioned in your roof storage resistive hot water systems might be great and can be really cost effective. If you've got so much solar and you need to use it because you can't export it, sure, it takes 4 times as much energy as a heat pump, but if you've got all that spare, go for it. The cost of those systems is so cheap that over the life of the system, it's going to cost you less. And there's even a few situations where instantaneous makes more sense. And one of the ones that we come across is like holiday homes where you might only be there, you know, 2 weeks of a year. You might have to go and stay there on the occasional weekend. It's really inefficient to be heating up a tank of hot water all the
Letting it sit
time.
there, yeah.
They can be cases where instantaneous works, even gas instantaneous hooked up to a little gas bottle, so you're not on the grid, might actually be cost effective and relatively low emissions compared to if you're running lots of stuff off gas. You can get electric instantaneous, but they normally need a dedicated sort of high power connection. So they're not really the answer for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a really interesting summary. Thanks, Dean.
Well, one thing I usually tell my clients when considering heat pump hot water is that you can't separate the decision on how big it should be from your choice of shower head. Yes. Because the dominant use of hot water for most people is the shower. And there's a huge range in performance of shower heads. I'm a big fan of this one. I don't know whether you can see it. This is a Methven Curie Satin Jet ultra low flow. Just happen to have one here. They're not very expensive. They're easy to fit on. Whereas a normal sort of old school shower head might be 12 to 15 litres a minute, this is 5. And the subjective experience is pretty damn good. So in other words, you're not compromising much, if anything, using one of these. And it's not only reducing the use of energy, it's significantly reducing use of water. So all other things being equal, if you halve the use of water, hot water, then you halve the size of the tank you need. So I guess I differ a little from Dean there in that I'm comfortable recommending people have fairly small hot water tanks, so long as they've chosen the shower head very carefully. And if they've decided they can live with something like this, and believe me, I think it's not a compromise at all, then you can use quite a small tank. Like the house we've just built, we have a 160 litre tank. Mm-hmm. It's a Reclaim Energy heat pump hot water service, 160 litre tank with these shower heads, and we had 5 people there over Easter, and we didn't run out.
Sarah, looks like you've got something you want to add to that.
Oh no, I'm just excited to hear about low flow shower heads.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Yeah, I mean, it's a double bonus really, because it saves water obviously, and it also saves you energy to heat your water.
Exactly.
Whichever way you're choosing to heat it. So fantastic.
Sometimes the smartest technologies are the ones that are quite small.
Darren would like to know, can hot water heat pumps be located in your roof space to take advantage of the warmer air up there? Is that a thing?
I haven't seen that. They can be located inside the house, inside the envelope of the house. But... Well,
we should clarify whether they mean the tank or the heat pump unit itself.
Yeah, that's true.
I suspect he means the heat pump unit itself, not the tank. And the heat pump units generate cold air when they they might exhaust the heat, the excess heat available, especially if it's running on a cold night. So I've never seen one in a confined space like that. I have seen reference to putting them in garages, so long as they are more than a certain minimum volume. But I've never seen it done in Australia.
Not in the roof.
I think there's a bit of a misconception with heat pumps when we talk about they extract heat from the air, that if it's cold, there's no heat in the air. But when they say that the heat they extract is like not what we call heat, but what I guess scientifically or in physics is heat, like anything above minus 273 degrees Celsius, it has heat in it. We just wouldn't call it heat. So obviously you don't really run heat pumps at minus 273 degrees Celsius, but they run them very well in climates that frequently go below 0 to minus 10, etc. A good quality heat pump can get enough heat from that cold air to still heat the home.
Yeah, so from the point of view of the technology of the heat pump, the difference between minus 5 degrees ambient temperature and 10 degrees ambient temperature is not actually that crucial. Yeah, I think there's a bit of a misconception that heat pumps don't work in really cold climates, but that's not true, is it?
No, that's correct. To come back to the question, Anna, there is an opportunity to put the hot water tank inside if you've got a heat pump hot water that as a separate heat pump from the tank. So broadly
Yeah.
speaking, heat pump hot water systems are either split units or they're integrated.
Integrated, yeah. Yeah.
And
With
obviously
the compressor, if you like, or the heat pump part, and then the the water tank part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So having so the market's basically split along those two lines. That split system heat pumps tend to be the higher quality ones, and they give more flexibility about how they're configured and mounted and so on. And they also have more options in terms of maintenance. So you can replace the tank independently of the heat pump and vice versa. So I'm a fan of them.
And you think that you could put the tank inside?
Yeah, so that's in my new place. We put the small 160 litre tank in a hallway cupboard, and the house is on stumps, and there's a fairly large subfloor cavity below that. So the heat pump's actually almost immediately under the tank, under the house, where there's sufficient. It's not an enclosed subfloor space, but it's so there's enough air movement in the subfloor cavity to allow sufficient airflow around the heat pump.
Yeah.
But being a high performance house in a heating dominated climate, the heat loss from the tank actually contributes to the overall heat needs of the house. So
yeah, right.
the heat loss from the tank actually lessens
extra heating in your house.
Yeah, exactly. It's an extra heat source. So it works slightly against you in summer, but in a heating dominated climate, it's a net plus.
Yeah, yeah. So just getting back to solar hot water for a second, Guy would like to know whether a solar hot water service with gas boosting can be converted to electric boosting. Come across that one before, Dave?
Yeah, I think the answer is usually not, but sometimes yes, but I'm actually not 100% sure. Maybe Richard or Sarah.
Yeah. Well, let's take a scenario where, let's say the client has a conventional instant gas boosted solar hot water system that's where the solar part and the tank part still works, and the gas is not working, or they want to stop using it. You could actually use that as a preheater for an instant electric, but broadly there are two types of instant electric hot water services: ones that allow for a variable inlet temperature and ones that don't. So you would need an instant electric hot water service that is of a type that specifically lets you have the inlet temperature that might be sometimes hot, sometimes cold.
Sounds like the answer to that is maybe, but it's complicated. Speak to an expert. Thank you, Richard.
I think so. And on that, in the industry as well, just to add quickly, I think it's important to understand that they're two actually professionals that you would speak to, two different trades. One's your electrician, one's your gas fitter. So that's a common problem we come across. So if someone is, changing their gas stove to electric, you've got to work with two different trades to get that done. So that would be a similar scenario there in that case, that it can get more complicated.
Yeah,
Darren would like to know. Sorry, Richard, go on.
Can I just make one point about the your common commodity solar gas boosted solar hot water service is that they're generally worse than a lot of people think, because they're often faulty and people don't even realize it. I did a job for a large organization that happened to own 16 houses in regional Victoria, and they're all less than 10 years old at the time I looked at them, and they all had solar hot water. And I went and inspected all of them, and more than half of them had faults in the solar hot water that weren't noticed. And in other words, they fail in a way that where the instant gas boosting overcomes the failure, so people don't notice the fault.
Right. So the solar part's not working properly, but the boosting's compensating.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I've been to clients where this has happened, and so these systems they tend to be more troublesome than people realise, and people with these on their roofs might find that the solar part isn't actually contributing anything. It's not
Yeah, right.
uncommon.
So keep an eye on it.
Yeah. So if
Yeah.
you're on the call and you've got us a solar hot water service, go out to the tank and just touch any of the fittings on the tank. If they're stone cold, and it tells you that the water in the tank is not at all heated. So any time of day and night, any time of day and night on a working solar hot water system, there will be water in the tank that it's at least mildly warm and often very hot.
Yeah.
So if you can touch those fittings on the tank and it's cold to touch, then it's a sign that the solar is almost certainly not working at all.
So Marie just wants to clarify, is she understanding correctly? If she runs her heat pump hot water system that has a timer set to run during solar generation hours, will it still supply hot water overnight?
Yes, it's a storage hot water system. Storage systems are all designed to heat up over one period and keep hot water for at least the next 24 hours, usually sort of 36 hours. So whether you heat it overnight or you heat it during the day, it should stay hot until the next cycle, unless you use more than the capacity of the tank. I guess the benefit of hot water systems like heat pumps, or even if you've got other types of storage hot water systems that are not on control, that can be where you can override the timing, is you can always sort of boost them in between if you need to. But if it's the right size tank and it's properly insulated, it should stay hot easily for over 24 hours.
Yeah, great. Okay, so time's ticking. So I think we need to move away from hot water systems and talk about solar. Talk us through the basics of rooftop solar, Dean.
Rooftop solar, the basics of rooftop solar. Okay, it was sort of pretty simple, really. Solar panels convert light into electricity. Richard or Sarah can jump in if I get into this technical one, but basically they convert this light from the sun into electricity. They connect to a thing called inverters on the side of your house, and that converts the electricity from the solar panels into the right type of electricity that your house uses. And then the inverter sends the electricity basically to your electricity connection, like just on the other side of your meter. So it's basically, electricity from the grid arrives through the meter. Electricity from the solar panel arrives just after the meter. So basically you use that first. If you've got enough, if you're generating enough, you use that first. If you're not generating enough, then you'll use the electricity from your energy retailer through this street. So it's basically like you've got two sources. You use your solar first as long as it's there. Obviously they generate during the day, not at night. They generate mostly in the middle of the day when the sun's brighter, but they still generate a bit when it's dusk and dawn sort of. They generate more in summer than in winter. They generate less if there's clouds. They generate less if there's shading. Sometimes shading can very heavily impact the system depending on how the system's designed. That's the basics. Is that a good explanation, or have I left anything out?
Very, very basic. That's great. Well, how do I know whether solar will work on my roof, and how do I choose the right size system?
Yeah, good question. I mean,
there's an element to how big's a piece of string.
Yeah, well, it is a bit like that. I mean, in terms of whether solar will work on your roof or not, if you've got a lot of shading, or if you just don't have a big enough roof space to put it on, then it might not work for you. Solar works on most roofs if you own the roof and are able to put solar panels on it. But yeah, if you've got a lot of shading, then it might not be worth it. Even if your roof faces the wrong way, like say it faces south, because the sun shines from the north and we get east and west. Even if the roof faces south, unless it's really steep, you probably still get some benefit from it. But that's getting into this situation.
And you can put panels on racks and so on to change the angle, even if they're on a south facing roof anyway, right?
Options, and it sort of connects to in terms of how much do you want. The best way to do it really is to either do it yourself or get someone like a professional to help you look at your energy usage, work out how much you can fit, work out how much you could generate, how it matches with your energy usage, and that's how you can figure out a good size, the right size for you. That's what Renew does in their energy consults. They match up your energy usage and your needs with your capacity to have a solar system. If you didn't do any of that, you know, the typical size solar system now is about 5 kilowatts. That's just a measure of how much it generates. A typical household, 5 kilowatts is a big enough solar system to meet heaps of their usage. Most places let you install 5 kilowatts. Most places let you, you know, export your excess energy to the grid to get a feed-in tariff for it. So that's a good general sort of rule of thumb, is that, you know, and then most government, you know, a lot of governments, there's a lot of government rebates for solar panels different in different states that give you extra benefits beyond the sort of federal rebate. That's always worth checking out. And a lot of people nowadays, with prices as they are, and with especially some of the rebates, if you use a fair bit of electricity, like an average amount, solar is very cost effective. It's probably the most cost effective way for the typical household to get renewable energy at low cost.
Yeah, if I can add to that, and picking up the point about the economics, I often hear people say that the economics aren't good because our feed-in tariffs are crap. So I've come up with this rule of thumb that I think is useful. It's useful to try and put the cost of, you know, we pay for solar upfront. So it's good to think of that cost of solar as buying 20 years worth of electricity in advance.
Yeah.
And by thinking of it like that, you divide the cost by the energy it's going to generate. And then you can look at the cost of your solar in terms of cents per kilowatt hour that it generates. And then you've got a fair and direct basis for comparing it with your electricity tariff. So the rule of thumb that I've come up with is look at the cost per kilowatt, the installed cost per kilowatt of capacity. So let's say a 4 kilowatt system that costs $4,800. That would be $1,200 a kilowatt installed. So that might be, you know, you could often do better than that, but let's just say $1,200 a kilowatt installed. You divide that by 300. This is a number that works for Melbourne. The number will be less the further north you go in Australia. But let's just use a Melbourne example. So $1,200 a kilowatt divided by 300 is 4. That's my estimate of the cost of the energy you generate over the life of the system. So 4 cents a kilowatt hour. So in other words,
which is pretty cheap compared with grid pricing.
Which is bloody cheap, and they're in today's dollars. And as Sol Griffiths was saying the other day when I saw him on Frankly, he was saying that, you know, the cost of retail energy is going up at a rate that's exceeding inflation. So if you can buy 20 years worth of electricity at 4 cents a kilowatt hour in 2022 dollars versus the cost of energy going up at twice the inflation, it's a steal. It's a steal. So even if your feed-in tariff is only, you know, 4 cents, you're still breaking even if you're exporting most of the energy. And for most of the time, that 4 cents is displacing purchasing electricity at a much, much higher rate. So if you look at the economics in terms of how much each kilowatt hour you're generating costs you, it gives a good basis for comparison.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Richard. What's your feeling about, what are your top tips for installing solar and how to do it, Sarah?
I think I just want to say, building on the conversation, that the glory days of feed-in tariffs are gone. And I'm sure everyone on this call knows that feed-in tariffs will not be going up. So the only direction for feed-in tariffs to go is down. And as Richard makes a good point, let's think even when they're getting to around 4 cents a kilowatt hour, that's when you're still actually quite comparable to your current solar system as the example he laid out. And so it's really important to understand that the time of use that we use our energy in our home has to change. and there's been a few comments in the chat about this already, but it's really important for people to understand when they're using their appliances in their home. That's when you're running your dishwasher, your washing machine, when you're running your big ticket items like your heating and cooling system. And as we've suggested, the timer on your hot water system can allow you to use it when you're producing that peak amount of energy during the day. And we have huge amounts of solar in this country. We're leading the world. It's 1 in 3 homes in Australia have solar. So there's also opportunities. If anyone is a renter on the call, if people can't consider putting solar on their own roof for any reason, you can also look at other options for solar, like community solar gardens are available for renters. So there's lots of other opportunities to tap into solar. So a community solar garden is a garden, or similar to a solar farm, an area of land that's dedicated to solar panels that allows renters to buy in to a PV system on that piece of land if they can't have it on their own roof. And it actually has set up the system now so you can get that offset against your electricity bill as a renter. So these kind of systems,
or presumably as a homeowner for whatever reason can't.
Yep.
I mean, my house is overshadowed by my neighbour's trees, such that I probably won't ever be able to have solar unless I make friends with my neighbours and get them to chop some branches down.
So these community systems are really important to think about as well, not just every individual householder, but let's think about how everyone in the community can benefit.
Yeah, that's a really great, it's a great alternative if for whatever reason you can't put solar on your own roof, for sure. Karina would like to know what size solar system you need if you want to charge an electric vehicle at home as well. Is there a rule of thumb for that?
I don't know if there's a rule.
Another how long's a piece of string question, probably.
Yeah. Suffice to say, you're likely to be able to make good use of as big a system as you can put on your house if you've got an EV, because electric vehicle batteries are generally very, very large, in the order of 40 to 100 kilowatt hours. So, yeah, in terms of rules of thumb and tips for solar, my tips would be go for quality, because you want a system to last a long time. So if you can avoid the cheap panels and inverters, and you can reasonably expect a system to last at least 20 years and possibly longer. I heard it expressed nicely once that if a solar panel can keep water and insects out, it's basically going to keep generating electricity forever. This is, I don't know if you can see this, but this is a picture from my book. This is a fellow named Martin Holliday who put these first solar panels on his roof in the US back in 1980. And they were still on his roof in 2020. This is, in other words, after 40 years, they're still generating pretty well as per the specs. So we estimate our lifetime in terms of, often typically 20 years, but done well, we can expect systems to last longer than that.
So check the warranties, check the reputation of the companies.
Yeah.
Neatly leading into a question from David, how do I find solar companies who I can trust, and what do I ask them so I can compare apples with apples? Dean, go on.
That's a good question. Look, like any industry, every industry has a bunch of really great businesses and a few that are not so great. How would we, and like any industry, it's not always easy to know who you can trust. So yeah, there's a few things you can do to improve the chances of making a right choice. One of them is to look at businesses that are members of the Clean Energy Council's approved solar retailer scheme. They have, it's a voluntary scheme where they ask members to commit to additional, customer service sort of obligations, and give good information, use certain quality components, etc. That's one good way to increase your chances of making sure you get a good outcome. Talking to people that you know or in your street, say, who've gotten solar panels, is a great way to find out who's good, because people will, if there's problems, they're usually going to be apparent, in the first couple of years. So getting recommendations from people that you know is really good. They're probably the two best ways. But the other way, I think, is if you really think about, what sort of questions you want to know, how well does the installer, the business sort of answer your questions? How forthcoming are they with good information? You know, when you ask them to give you advice, do you feel like they're just sort of telling you whatever, or do you feel like they're really paying attention to what you ask and giving you an answer that's tailored for you? That's a really good indication of a business that is taking care and wants to make sure its customers have a good outcome. So I think they're probably the main three ways.
Yeah, I've got a couple of tips in terms of choosing a solar provider. One is never buy from someone who does a door-to-door or cold calling. Secondly, look in favour of companies that are of a medium size. So often my experience is much larger companies tend to be, there's too much of a gap between the salesperson and the person on the ground delivering the system, and so promises won't necessarily get followed through. On the other hand, if you choose a company that's too small, there's perhaps less confidence that they might be in for the long haul. So medium-sized companies, and choose systems that have been around for, choose companies that have been in the business and specialising in solar for a long time. So if you can filter candidate solar installers on that basis, medium-sized, that have been around a long time, it's probably a good starting point.
We're getting quite a few questions about whether solar PV systems work in power outages.
The answer to that is it depends, and it depends on exactly how you got the system configured and how your inverter works, and often whether you have a battery or not. Basically, your bog standard solar system is designed to work in conjunction with the grid. If the grid is not there, it doesn't work. Part of that is a safety thing. If there's an outage and the people from the power company work on the lines, the last thing they need is to grab a wire that they think is dead that's been fed all this energy from your solar system. So that's a basic reason why they're designed like that. You can get inverters that are designed to run when there's an outage, and they have this sort of islanding feature where they can disconnect themselves from the grid completely so that they avoid that safety problem. The thing is, though, if you are running just off your solar panels and not from the grid, you really do need a battery, because the solar generation varies. Even just if a cloud passes overhead, it drops for like, 20 seconds and comes up again. You won't notice that if you're on the grid. But if you're just running off the solar panel, you suddenly have no power for 20 seconds. So you really need a system that's designed to smooth out those variations. And that's normally having a battery. And again, also a battery designed to operate in an outage. There are one or two inverters that have a system built into them with a bit of battery in them to ride out through those periods. If you want to have outage, protection in your solar system, absolutely talk about that within the installer and make sure they give you a clear answer as to whether or not the system will do it. It'll normally cost a bit more, so it might not be worth it if you have one outage every 4 years, like in a lot of places in cities, for example, where outages are very rare. If you're in an area where outages are more frequent, it's probably really worth it to look at getting a battery.
It's known as either grid independence or, as opposed to off-grid. Or islanding, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. Islanding is a technical term that's often used. The whole thing about, how grid independent can you be is a good one. It's pretty easy to get pretty grid independent with a solar and battery system. Like, 80% of the time you're not using the grid. It's really hard to get 100% because, there's certain times of year when you just can't generate. There are certain times when you just need to use extra power. So, even getting to 95% off grid can be a bit expensive, but possible. But 100% takes a lot. Obviously, it can be done. People do it, but that's usually people in remote areas for whom it's very expensive to bring power there in the first place. I generally think for people, especially in urban areas, if you're aiming for as much grid independence as you want, but still using the grid as a backup, that's pretty good system. You get both worlds, really.
So let's talk about batteries. Should I get battery storage? Is it worth the money?
Yes and no. If you want it to pay for itself in avoided electricity costs, the answer is probably not. But batteries give you other benefits aside from just that being able to use your solar later in the day. So if you value those other benefits like blackout protection, like going easier on the grid, then the answer is maybe yes, depending on how much value you attribute to those other benefits that a battery can give you.
Yeah, and I would recommend that we don't bypass community battery schemes as well too. It's not that every single house needs a battery whacked on the side of it. That's not really something that the whole electricity grid can support and needs. Looking at community batteries may be a good option if there's some systems like that around. And I'm also very excited personally for vehicle to grid charging, because as Richard mentioned before, the battery in an electric vehicle is about 3 times greater than the size of a battery you can get on the side of the wall. So I think there's a lot of potential there, and also the ability for the electric vehicle and the home to share energy between each other means that you could charge up your car at home during the day when the sun's out and then use that energy at nighttime when you're using it in the home.
Seems to be a no-brainer, really, doesn't it? If you've got a battery sitting there in the garage,
Yeah, and the
why not be able to run your house on it, or indeed
Yeah.
feed that into the grid at times when there's grid shortages or lower.
Yeah,
grid
and
capacity.
there's a few different protocols for power from the battery, from the car battery to be used. Like there's vehicle to grid, there's vehicle to house, and there's vehicle directly to plug in your kettle to your car or whatever. Yeah, it's still
Really?
only really just starting to happen. I really reckon, and I think a lot of people in the industry reckon that within sort of about 10 years, when electric vehicles are much more common and a lot of this has evolved a bit more, the car will be the battery that you buy. It's like, buying a standalone battery will be probably almost, like buying a standalone video camera nowadays. You don't really do it unless you're a cinematographer or a filmmaker, because your phone's got the video and that's good enough. And that's probably going to be the case for most people. Like the car's a battery that you need. You won't need a battery.
What about during the day? Hank says, what about during the day when you want to drive your car, though? You can't have it plugged in, charging up off your solar.
Well, no, of course not. It depends on how you use the car and how you manage it. Again, in 10 or 15 years' time, if you're driving your car to park in a car park somewhere, you're probably going to be able to charge it there. There's a lot that we don't know still. One of the things about electric vehicles, though, look, certainly there are some people who drive very long distances every day, but most people, especially in urban areas, and I don't just mean cities, I mean in a lot of sort of towns as well, don't really drive that far on a regular daily basis. Obviously some do, but typically not. And a lot of people will only need to won't need to charge an electric vehicle every day anyway. They might need to charge it once a week or whatever. And as batteries get more capacity, that'll be even less so. So that's all going to change. And it is very early days to see exactly how it's going to land.
But we are starting to see some big moves, like Bank Australia saying that they won't support any loans for combustion vehicles after 2025. So that's good signalers for the Australian market, where we don't have a lot of regulation in this space, to support the uptake of EVs.
Paul would like to know, when building a new home and adding a storage battery in the future, or wanting to add a battery in the future, what do I need to consider in my plans?
Great, get 3-phase power.
Really? Is that necessary to have a battery?
I think I'm thinking about keeping the possibilities open for electrical vehicle charging in the future.
Okay.
It's a really smart idea to have that set up. And what we have in a lot of our homes in our 7-star homes program is that they've just put 3-phase power in, and then they've set up the wires and often just create like a blank face plate. The Sparky will put that in for the point where the EV charger will be in the future. And then that's all set up, ready to go. So when you make that decision about electric vehicles, then you're all there. You've got everything you need.
Is that the same advice for non-EV batteries, house batteries?
I'll let Dean answer that one.
3-phase.
Is 3-phase necessary or not necessary?
This is getting a bit out of my area of expertise. I don't think so necessarily for a battery. It probably more depends on what other appliances you're going to have. If you're going to have a lot of sort of appliances that draw a lot, then that's when you might be starting to think about 2-phase or 3-phase. One example is, we mentioned briefly earlier, instantaneous electric hot water systems. They use a heap of power. People often find they need to get 3-phase or 2-phase for that. I don't think so for putting in a battery, but I'm not really an expert on that, so I might be mistaken.
Okay, so aside from three-phase, what other considerations are there if you know you want a battery in the future, but you're not ready to install one yet, and you're putting in a solar system?
Well, there's a couple of things that I would suggest people look for if they're shopping for a battery. People can't assume that a battery system is necessarily going to give blackout protection. So that's something they should be quite explicit that they want. The other thing is even more surprising, that you can't assume that in a blackout with a battery that your solar will keep working. Some battery systems will back you up in the case of a blackout, but your PV will go off.
Okay.
Okay, so you need to be very explicit with your installer or your system designer that you want to have blackout backup. That's a bit of a tongue twister.
Yeah, blackout protection with continuous PV operation.
Yeah.
So the last thing you want is to have an extended blackout, and then the sun is still shining and your battery's draining away when it could be charging up. Or maybe you're entering the blackout situation with your battery state of charge fairly low and you don't have much to draw on. You really want to be able to be charging that from your solar if the sun is out. So yeah, they're the things that you really need to be looking for: blackout protection and the ability to charge from PV when the blackout is on.
And I think that it depends on, like, there are inverters that will handle batteries and inverters that won't. So it may just be as simple as making sure you get the right inverter.
Yeah, this is
plug in a battery later.
This is going back to that whole first question about what is a solar system consists of. The inverter is really that key linkage between the solar system and pretty much everything else. Like the battery usually, is connected in some way. I mean, there's a bit of complexity about different ways to connect battery, but generally, the battery feeds in electricity to the system, similar to where the solar panels do. The inverters, like, often in control. Some batteries have their own inverters. Gets more complicated, but yes, the inverter absolutely has to support it. The battery, depending how it's connected, will you need to support it too. And you just really need to ask these questions about all the components if you want to have blackout protection.
Yeah.
And if you want to generate solar when you've got a blackout.
Yep. So we also promised that we would touch on energy efficient appliances tonight, including induction cooktops and LED lighting.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah, do you have any tips on researching and choosing efficient appliances? Also including, of course, washing machines, dishwashers, everything else that runs on electricity in your house?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more stars you can afford, the better. I think there's a really simple system we've got set up with appliances that you can see the star rating label. There's a lot of good understanding across the public about what that is. And so people are able to read that pretty quickly and trying to match your budget with what the star rating is and try and find that sweet spot and get the most efficient appliance possible. I think there's been some big improvements in technology, like dryers. Condenser dryers now are much more efficient, and it's a lot more available in the market over the last couple of years compared to your traditional older style dryers. So simple upgrades of appliances like that can really save a lot on your energy costs in the home.
And that's a government-run program, the Energy Star Rating Scheme. So it's not run by industry.
That's right. Yeah, that's run at a federal level. Yeah, across all of Australia.
Yep, it's independent, and there's star ratings for energy use, and also for things like washing machines and dishwashers, also water efficiency star ratings. So those appliances that use both will have star ratings for both. And so that's a really useful metric to judge by. Somebody asked before whether hot water heat pumps have energy efficiency star ratings.
No, but they do generate STCs. The best figure of merit in terms of performance of a heat pump or water service is the number of STCs it qualifies for. So
what's
the
STC, Richard?
is small scale technology certificate. That's the renewable energy target rebate scheme. And systems qualify depending on how well they perform for a certain number of STCs. And you can use it as a quasi-star.
Essentially reduces the cost of them, is that right?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
like a good, let's say a half decent heat pump hot water service qualifies for 26 STCs at $40 an STC. That's $1,040 off the upfront cost of the system. So, but what people might not realize is that the number of STCs it qualifies for is directly related to how well it performs. So you can use that as a de facto star rating, if you like.
That's good to know.
I think the other,
yeah, I was just going to say you can look up the number of STCs on the Clean Energy Regulator website.
but the other data point on heat pump hot water systems that is also can be relatively easy to find on the specification sheet is the thing that Richard mentioned before, the coefficient of performance, or the COP. This is always listed on the spec sheet, and this is basically how much energy out compared to energy in. Like we talked before about, you know, you put in 1 kilowatt, you get out 4. That's 4 times the efficiency. If the COP is 5, that's more efficient than 4. If it's 3, that's less efficient than 4. That's another good, usually felt relatively easy to find on the specification sheet. But yeah, it would be great if they were in the Energy Star system, because one of the great things about the star rating system is that the little sticker gives you like number of kilowatt hours per year that the appliance uses. And that's a really easy way to quickly figure out how much will this cost me? How much will that one cost me? Is the price difference in buying the appliance worth the money that it saves me to run it? So yeah, it'd be good to see the star rating system go on the heat pump water systems as well.
Another resource is that is terrific is Choice. They do real life testing of not every product that's out there in the market, of course, but a representative sample. And so there, I always think it's terrific to go and see what Choice thinks about particular brands, and read reviews and try and choose brands that offer good warranties, easy maintenance, and spare parts to improve longevity. Would be my top tips for in addition to star ratings.
Could I pick up on a question that came up earlier in the chat when we were talking about heaters, but I feel like it's a bit relevant now. We're talking about the different efficient appliances. Someone asked, if you go off gas and you've got electrical appliances, what happens if there's an electricity outage?
Yeah,
What do you do? And this is an important question, and the answer is usually, well, you know, it's not always a happy story. One thing to keep in mind though is that most modern gas appliances also you need electricity to run, like ducted heating systems, instantaneous hot water systems generally need electricity to run too. So a lot of gas appliances are also off if the electricity is out. We would usually recommend to people, you know, it's good to have a backup for when there's an outage, whether that's a torch for lights, or whether that's like a little camping stove or a barbecue that you can cook with. You know, they're good options. Hot water is the most difficult one, I guess. You know, how do you get hot water when there's nothing to heat it with? Yeah, that's tricky. The reality is we have less outages now than ever before in most places, and even the places that still have a nose for number of outages generally often have less than we used to. So outages are becoming less frequent. We always remember them when they happen. Yeah. We've
got people very keen to talk about induction cooking. So let's just touch on that briefly. I am a massive fan and think it's a bit of a no-brainer, except for when there's a power outage. What is there to know about induction cooking? I guess my feeling is that there are a lot of people who are still very attached to gas cooking, and that's that there are people out there who are reluctant to get off gas because of the cooking thing. Very attached to their gas cooking. So what can we tell those people?
Can I say we see that all the time in our program? A lot of new estates now are actually going completely off gas or electric. And so as part of the sales strategy for the staff, when they are helping clients decide about buying in an all-electric estate, they encourage them to use their gas barbecue outside and talk to them about that as their gas cooking option. And they, even though inside the house would be electric cooking. And they're telling me that for a lot of people, that's a winner. They've also told me that a lot of the leading brands now are actually ceasing creating gas appliances in the next couple of years. So, for example, Fisher & Paykel and other leading brands have reached out to the sales staff and said, we're not going to make any more gas appliances. So there's a big wave of induction cooking coming. I think it's going to be even bigger.
Yeah, and I think I'm just reading the chat. Petra, you don't necessarily need new pots to use an induction cooktop. We got an induction cooktop, and the only thing that didn't work was our old coffee pot. So all of our existing pots worked. It's a bit of a myth that you will definitely need to replace all your pots. Some may not work, but you might be surprised at how many will.
Yeah,
Did
it
you
does
use
depend on.
the trick to put a magnet on the bottom of the pot to
Yeah.
test. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, just have a fridge magnet at hand and you can test.
I think the main one is aluminium cookware. It doesn't work on induction, and a lot of people do have aluminium cookware. So you can actually get sort of heat pads that you can put on induction stoves that heat cookware that's not compatible with induction. So that's probably a good option if you've got one or two particular pots that you really like. But yeah, there is the changeover. But
and I think there's also a misconception that some people have a misconception that, well, they equate the sort of the ceramic electric cooktops, the older style, the ones with the glass plate, but underneath it's still resistive electric, with induction, and they're completely different technology. Whereas, ceramic cooktops respond the same way that old style electric did, slow to heat up, slow to cool down, etc. Induction is as responsive as gas. And
this is the thing, that people don't.
See, I'm a convert. It's a complete joy to just cook on.
I've approached it. I've had an experience recently of I'm currently in a rental apartment in the city where we spend some of the time, and this apartment has gas cooking, which and having had induction only for 13 years, going back to gas has just been horrible. And it's given me a newfound appreciation of how much better induction is. The range of control.
I've gone back from induction to old style, really ancient electric resistive, and it's just doing my head in.
You poor thing.
It's even worse than gas.
Oh my God. Yeah. One thing that there are benefits of induction that you just sort of become subconscious that you have to go back to what you had before to appreciate just how good it is. I'll give you an example. I have a saucepan for boiling water for spaghetti, metal handles high on the sides of the saucepan. On induction, it could boil that, cook the spaghetti, and then lift it off without needing mitts off the stove. I tried that with the gas, and there was so much heat coming up around the sides of the saucepan that I picked up the saucepan full of boiling water and dropped it, because it was I hadn't expected that all that heat so high up away from the surface, and so that was a reminder that gas. Yeah, there's a lot of incidental heat that happens with gas cooking, and it's just a range of control, being able to finally control the heat level down to very low or very high, and to do that very quickly if you need to. So
I have two young kids, and teaching them, when we moved from our house with induction to a rental with gas, and then to our new house with the old style electric, I've had to teach them again, and how to handle the heat, how to notice that things that might be hot, and it's a lot less safe, frankly.
The safety aspect of induction is a real benefit.
Another good way of looking at technologies as they emerge and start to become dominant is that they really can become dominant when they start being able to do things that the technology they're replacing could never do. And we're starting to see that with induction, that we've been judging it till now on being at least as good as what came before it, but they're starting to be able to do really funky things that you could never think of doing with gas or even older electric. Things like having the cooktop surface adapt to the shape of the cookware and indeed where it is. So being able to automatically resize the amount of heat it's giving depending on how big it is, and then you want to move it from the front to the back, you just move it to the back, and it keeps on working and adapting to where it is. So things like that are examples of the technological maturity of with induction as it just gets much better than what came before it.
Liz wants to know whether induction cooktops have a big power draw at startup, and what's like. Can we comment on their electricity use in general?
Yeah, they do tend to require sort of high current supply, but in short bursts. So while I'm pretty sure they generally use less electricity than the old style of electric, like in, resistive or ceramic cooktops, they do need to, draw in short, sharp sort of bursts. So some people do need to upgrade wiring to have an induction. It depends again on how your wiring is. And for that reason, actually, inductions might not be suitable for fully off-grid properties that might be, running on their own sort of solar and that for a long period of time, because of that short, sharp burst might be a higher demand than they need from other stuff. It depends. Again, if you're going on an off-grid property or you've got limited electrical capacity, you really need to find out, okay, what's the maximum draw of my induction that I'm likely to experience, and will my system cope with that?
Yeah,
if people,
Go, Sarah.
if people,
Oh.
Sarah?
I was going to say, just to comment on our own experience, I almost missed the window, and this is really important for everyone to note, because we had to install 32 amp to get our induction cooktop, and almost missed the window because the electrician didn't actually have that on his specs. So we happened to see him on site, and we have to mention it was induction. He went, oh, great, I've got to draw a 32 amp down here. So we almost missed that opportunity then. And the other thing I think someone's mentioned in the chat is that you can get a $50 induction unit if you're interested in trying out the technology and you just want to see how that works, as a relatively cheap way to test it out.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing. In response to what Dean said about people that might have a power limited off-grid situation, you're still going to be able to plug in something that draws only 10 amps in your kitchen, and actually that's how we're managing with the gas here in the apartment, is that we've still got the gas cooktop, but most of the cooking I'm doing on a one element induction unit plugged in on the side. So yeah, that's a good try before you buy option, or in the off-grid situation, it might avoid the need for a high capacity connection.
Yeah, because they'd be limited at the sort of standard current for a standard power plant, wouldn't they? So they wouldn't draw in that high.
Yeah, so they're a little bit less powerful, a little bit, maybe not quite such a smooth cooking experience, but they're certainly a thing. I mean, a few years ago, there was a plug-in portable induction hot plate that was being passed around the Renew staff. Anyone who was doing a renovation, it was their turn to have it, including us for a while there. So I just wanted to say, I put it in the chat as well, but there's an article coming out in the next issue of Sanctuary, which will be out on sale in late November, on exactly this topic. So benefits of induction, busting some of the myths, and particularly focusing on how to retrofit induction into existing kitchens, including some case studies of people who've done it in various exciting ways. So subscribe if you haven't already to get that issue, or find it in your newsagent from the end of November, and do a bit more reading. So we're running out of time. We're going to quickly segue to LED lighting, or energy efficient lighting, sorry, which is basically the same thing. How can I save energy with my lighting, guys?
Great. Where do we start here? I think one of the biggest misconceptions is, maybe about 5 to 10 years ago, we lived in downlight central. And so every home that had a renovation was built around that time just had downlights plugged all through the ceiling. And most of those downlight were not IC4 rated. So meaning that you couldn't actually put your insulation over the top. That was a fire hazard. And so one of the biggest changes we've seen in the industry is that those old halogen downlights have now been upgraded to LEDs, and they were the people that would come and knock on doors around the country and come in and swap your light bulbs for you. But now most of those new downlight systems are IC4 rated, and that means that you can run your insulation straight over the top, while still having that look, if that's what you're going for in your home. And the reason we want your insulation to go over the top, and I see there's been a few comments about insulation in the chat tonight. I know we won't get a chance to dive into it, but I do want to say that we know from our research that if you have 5% of your insulation missing in your ceiling, then that can reduce the performance of the whole insulation by 50%. So let's say you have R6 in your ceiling, but you're missing 5%. You've got 95%. You think that's pretty good. No, actually, the performance of your whole ceiling has now gone down to R3. So this is why insulation and continuous insulation, covering all those IC4 rated downlights, is so important. The other thing I want to say here is the value of pendant lighting. One pendant light can equal the same as 4 downlights. So I would absolutely recommend the use of pendant lights, the use of wall lights, sconces, different lighting alternatives to your typical downlights.
And then all you need in this, the only hole you need is the width of the flex.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Dean, got thoughts on energy efficient lighting?
Oh, only that, the lighting technology has changed so much in the last 10 years. I mean, 10 years ago, we were swapping out incandescent bulbs for compact fluoros.
Oh, yeah.
Now we're swapping out compact fluoros for LEDs. LEDs is so much more efficient. You can run, like that's why they're used so much in like electrical appliances and battery operated appliances. A battery can run an LED for years. They're so efficient. It's a no-brainer. And look, people often associate LED with, oh, it's really bright, it's really light. Actually, the LED lights designed to be used in your house. They come in all sorts of shapes and sizes, different tonalities, just like light bulbs do. I've got them all through my place. They're not much more expensive than compact fluoros. Now they're not much more expensive than incandescents used to be. They save so much power. 10, 15 years ago, we used to really advise people to like turn lights off to save money on their bills. Now you'd almost hardly bother giving that advice. Obviously, it still makes a difference, but the amount of electricity lighting uses, LEDs uses so little that it really doesn't make that much difference if you leave a light on overnight by mistake. Obviously it's still best to turn it off, but
still a good idea to have your outside lights on, movement sensors and that kind of thing, and maybe have if you're designing your house from scratch and it's easy to do, then have some master switches that you can flick off next to the front door that turn off all your lights potentially. But yeah, they're really minor little things, aren't they?
I think a good point on like what Sarah was saying about downlights, downlights were so super popular, and you look at a lot of houses with downlights now, half of them, when they die, people don't replace them because the houses are really overlit in the downlight era. Often people want much less bright lighting than the builder or that thinks the house needs. And so, having like, a main central sort of light and using some sort of portable lights like lamps is what a lot of people find gets the light right for them. If they've got a workroom like a kitchen, you want a good overhead, super bright light. But for most rooms of the house, people don't usually like super bright light. So good to think about how much lighting do you really need and how flexible do you want your lighting? One central light and a few sort of lamps, or that might give you much more flexibility with your lighting than
LED light globes last for just so much longer than any of their predecessors too. So that's a great development.
Can I pick up on something Sarah said about downlights and IC rating? So this is an IC rated light. So if people are shopping for downlights, what they need to look for is that logo on the light and the letters IC. So it says IC4 and a little logo showing, well, it represents insulation going over the top of the light. So units like this can also come with switch selectable color temperature. So instead of having to choose at the point of sale whether it's cool or warm light, you can just select it at the point you put it in the ceiling. So that's handy. The other thing to note is if you're replacing legacy downlights that might be hardwired, the electrician has to put a plug base in the ceiling, and that the new downlights come with a plug, and they're not hardwired. So if the unit fails, then it doesn't need an electrician to replace it. There's no replaceable bulb. I call them a sealed unit because it's all in one. If it fails, you throw it away. But they last a very long time, as Dean said. So, there's other problems associated with downlights. It's no, as Dean was saying, this is no longer an efficiency story when it comes to lighting efficiency, but typically downlights, they're my nemesis when I'm doing home assessments because they're associated with other problems As Sarah already mentioned, that 5% rule, that 5% uncovered is usually, or very often, space left around downlights, and there's a minimum requirement for space left around downlights that is often much more space is left. Bats are thrown to the side, these are put in, and huge amounts of space. So they're not so much a lighting issue, but an efficiency problem with respect to insulation. Also, the lights they're replacing often have air pathways through them. So legacy downlights are a draft problem. They ventilated light fittings allow air to pass through for cooling, and that's a huge source of draft when you might have 20 of these in a large room. And the fourth problem is often the older downlights have a separate transformer, and those transformers themselves can be quite inefficient. I was at a house yesterday using thermal imaging, and I could see this big hot spot on the ceiling next to the light, but it wasn't the light. It was the transformer sitting on the ceiling, and it was much hotter than I expected. And what I realized I discovered was that the transformer was up in the ceiling and covered with loose fill insulation, and it was overheating.
Yeah.
And it was old cellulose insulation, so it was possibly a combustion problem that we'd avoided. So
yes.
So in other words, downlights are 4 different potential efficiency problems rolled into one, and so getting them fixed is a big priority.
And there are for all kinds of non-LED light fittings, there are now LED retrofit options. So, if you've got old style halogen downlights, you can replace them with LED, much more efficient and safer LED options. Same goes for fluorescent tube lights. Those are not necessarily the LED lights that you would choose if you were starting from scratch, but if you have those light fittings already, then there are options for plug and play, new, mostly plug and play, new LED replacement globes. So that's just something that's good to know. Dave had a follow-up question for you, Sarah. How does one pendant equal 4 downlights? Did you mean in emitted light, power consumption, or something else?
Yes, so I do mean in the light they're emitting. So say, for example, we're looking over a dining table and you have the option to do 4 downlights, which is probably a bit old school now. I don't know how many people would do that. Most would do a pendant design-wise, but in terms of the amount of light that you'd be receiving on that dining table, the light from the downlights tends to go directly down, whereas a pendant light would spread out. So you'd get that same amount of light achieved. And as we know, if we can reduce the amount of watts per metre squared that we are introducing into a new home or an existing home, then it will reduce our overall energy costs.
Richard, what's the brand of that light that you're holding? A couple of people would like to know.
This is LED Vance.
LED Vance?
Yeah, I often direct people to a website, Reduction Revolution, and they have this brand and also Philips and some other brands. So they're generally only $10 to $15 each. So the upfront cost is probably less than most people realise.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's
a lot less than 10 years ago.
Yeah, and one of the most fundamental pieces of advice around these is if you've got legacy halogen downlight fittings, don't replace the bulbs. Okay, you need to replace the entire fitting.
Yeah.
So if you replace the legacy bulb with an LED replacement, then you retain those other 4 potential problems: the insulation problem, the vent problem, and the transformer problem are probably still retained if you just replace the bulb. And one of these doesn't cost much less than one of these.
Yeah. Okay. I just want to double back to talking about cooling for a second, because somebody just asked in the chat, why no mention of evaporative cooling systems tonight?
Are we talking about efficient technologies? Or?
Yeah.
No, it can be more efficient, I think, in some climates than others, of course.
Yeah. So why are they not considered to be particularly energy efficient or a good choice?
If we're directly comparing an evaporative cooling system with a split system, reverse cycle air conditioner, then the reverse cycle air conditioner will come out on top through what we've been talking about tonight, that coefficient of performance, that COP is going to be much more efficient with the split system. The other thing you get with evaporative systems is you get the losses through the ducts, meaning that you've got all these holes throughout your ceiling, and that's going to be a source of losing the warm air that you've created in wintertime and that cool air that you've created in your home in summer. It's just going to leak out into the roof.
Yeah, I'd add to that. Evaporative systems are you spend this energy in a system to cool down the air, and then it just goes through the house and out an open window. So it's one pass through. Split systems are recirculating, so they're acting on the air that's already in the room. So you're not throwing away that work that's been done in conditioning the air in the first place. So the idea that you need a window open to operate your air conditioner just does my head in.
So I have a question then. So are there some climate zones where evaporative is more effective or more useful, or is it just we're just ruling it completely out?
Certainly true that there are some climates in which an evaporative cooler is more effective than other climates, but whether it's true that there are some places where it's more efficient than a reverse cycle, that's your question, Dean, right?
I think at the same time too, if you already have evaporative installed in your home, then there's ways that you can run it more efficiently, I think. And probably one of those things we talked about tonight is if you have a solar system on your roof, then you could use it with the timing. So when you're creating that solar power is when you're running your evaporative. If you have the option of putting in an evaporative or a split system, then you would not choose the evaporative. You'd choose a split system in terms of efficiency.
Yeah, and we can't separate the efficiency of evaporative from the water efficiency as well. They can use significant amounts of water, and the climates in which they
work best
are often the driest climates where the water is precious a lot of the time.
Yeah, because the technology doesn't work nearly so well when it's humid. We are just about out of time. I'm going to just ask for your final thoughts, all three of you, on final takeaways for people who have been watching tonight on how to choose energy efficient systems. What's the first thing to consider? What's the top takeaway tip? Whatever you like, however you like to tackle that.
And I reckon a good tip and a good reminder for people is, you don't have to do everything. Do what you can and do what makes most sense for you and what works for you. You can go completely zero emission. You can go completely, net zero energy home if you're able to, and if that's what you want. You can go part way there and you're still having a great benefit. I would pay attention to the stuff that makes the biggest differences, and certainly in colder climates, that's heating and draft stopping and insulation. I think that's the main thing. Find what works best for you and what's giving you the benefit they want, because it's that balance between the emissions, the cost, the comfort. They all sort of work with each other. Just find the right one and find the good advice. There's a lot of good resources out there, not just the stuff that Renew does, but like Energy Consumers Australia has a whole set of information resources. There's a lot of info out there. Find the good info, talk to people, work out what's right for you.
Thanks, Dean. What about you, Sarah?
Back up what Dean just said. I think the most important thing I want people to take away from tonight is to also understand that your home itself can be used as a battery. We've talked a lot tonight about the technologies that you can have in your home. What are your appliances, your solar, your EVs, and your batteries? But we haven't talked too much about energy efficiency, and that's for another session. But there's lots of great resources and information out there. Renew is the first point of call for information on energy efficiency, because if you can improve the energy efficiency of your home, then you're using your home as a battery. It means the heat that you create in your home, the cool that you create in your home is going to be stored in your home, and you won't be wasting it by letting it leak out into your ducts or any other gaps that might be around the home or out through the windows. So that's my biggest lesson for tonight.
Great, thank you. Richard, final word.
Okay, if you're embarking on the goal of improving your house, remember it's a journey. It's going to take a number of years. It took me 7 years, I think it was 6 or 7 years, to go from pretty crap to pretty damn good. And so set yourself a goal, and get a home assessment. I mean, if you're starting out, get professional assistance to. This is what I do for a living. I live for the light bulb moments that I help my clients have in helping see things about their own houses that they hadn't realized before. And yeah, there's so much that people don't realize about their own houses, and when you can help people see their house in a whole different light, and help them prioritize, then that's a really good outcome. You set yourself a goal, get a professional to help you come up with your map for that journey, if you like.
Yeah, very good good point, Richard. So thank you very much, everyone. That's all the questions, so really all the time we've got tonight, more than the time we have available. Thanks so much, Dean, Sarah and Richard, for sharing your time and expertise.
Thanks,
and thank
Anna.
you to all our attendees for tuning in to this Sustainable House Day session and for all your questions. Very sorry that we didn't get to all of them. We did our best. There's plenty more coming up in our Sustainable House Day program, starting with Retrofitting for Resilience, which is a series running weekly in November. So please visit the Sustainable House Day website for all the details and to register. You can buy tickets for individual events or discounted series passes, and we've also introduced an annual pass for all Sustainable House Day events. Don't forget, members of Renew receive free or discounted tickets, and we always have an allocation of free places for anyone experiencing financial difficulty. And finally, a quick plug from me for Sanctuary. If you're not already a subscriber, or if you have someone in your life who would just love reading about sustainable design 4 times a year, we'd love it if you jump online at sanctuary.renew.org.au and sign up or gift a subscription. Thank you again and good night.